Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the WellZest Podcast. You are in for an absolute treat today. I have Kate Starr, who is just incredible. Kate is a certified nervous system regulation practitioner with a master's degree in public health, specializing in behavioral change in women's health from George Washington University. As a nervous system coach, she helps ambitious, driven women overcome burnout and chronic stress through holistic nervous system regulation techniques. Through extensive research and personal experience, Kate developed her unique approach, Soma Neuroalignment, when she noticed that many nervous system practitioners specialized in only one or two areas of regulation, but few had created a method to combine both psychological and physiological modalities into one powerful subconscious practice. Her signature program, Nervous System Reset, offers both one-on-one and small group coaching, which has helped hundreds of women to find success in long-term regulation. Guys, Kate, you're amazing. Like, what you do is amazing. You know, I want to say before we even dive in, I loved watching the testimonials from the clients that you've worked with on your website, on social media. Just the transformation and what you're able to do is incredible. So everyone stay tuned because Kate is a wealth of knowledge. So Kate, welcome to the podcast.
That introduction, you're too good to me. It is so good to be here. I'm so excited for our conversation and to dig in.
So jazzed, so jazzed. So we were catching up a little bit, before we started here, and one of the things I always like to do is take a time machine. Like, we step into a time machine and we go back, and I love origin stories, how people got to where they are, what shaped them, what their childhood was like, what their working career was like. So I would love for you to tell us a little bit about you, and who you were before you stepped into this work.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And vulnerability is so healing, right? And it was so important for me to be able to share my story because I lived with so much shame about it before because I didn't know what was going on. And I'll kind of explain that a little bit more, right? But I'm so happy and excited to share my story with you and hopefully inspire other women maybe going through similar. My childhood, it was complex. And I had a relationship with my biological father that was forced through the courts. And he was a very manipulative and sinister man. We don't have a relationship today. But what was interesting is the dichotomy of having somebody who really gave conditional love and was nitpicky and was always kind of finding ways that I was doing wrong, right? Even though I was a child, compared to a mother who was this absolute, badass, working in women's development, somebody who was just a go-getter and really built herself up from a world of her own trauma and growing up in poverty to this exceptional career. And so I had this interesting juxtaposition between these beliefs being instilled in me by my biological father when I was a child that really made me question my worth, if I was lovable, if I was loved even by my mother, and a woman who didn't push perfectionism, pushed, enjoying childhood and loving yourself and, whatever you do, you'll do it well and you'll be exceptional if you care about it and you're passionate about it. And so what I found is that as I got older, it became difficult to navigate the kind of differences in approaches and in parenting, even though they weren't together, right? I was raised by them separately and I didn't see my biological father that often, but when I did, he really made sure things stuck, right? And feeling like I wasn't allowed to have problems because I had such a strong mother in my life, right?
Okay.
And so I really thought, okay, so I had this person that had caused a lot of havoc in my life, but I had this super strong figure. So I'm good, right? I'm fine. I'm fine, right? And I had experienced some other traumas as well growing up, kind of like big T traumas. But this is why I always say that you don't have to identify with trauma to need nervous system regulation, because when we're growing up by nature, our survival mind is super malleable. And so everything that everyone is saying to us, we're taking in as data on how do we move through the world? How do we make sure we keep ourselves safe? But we don't have the nuance of our adult mind. And so often as children, we take somebody else's bad day or their projections as indications of what we're doing wrong or ways that we need to change, right? And that carries us into adulthood. And no one really comes out unscathed from that, unfortunately, right? But also, fortunately, because often those are the foundational aspects of how we really do protect ourselves and survive, right? They were necessary in whatever environments we were growing up in. However, when I got older, I fell into the kind of trap of really measuring my worth by accolades, by my resume, by, being top of my class, by being top of my social circle, by being top of XYZ, right? And I had a really high drive and passion towards the things that I loved. I don't think that that is bad. And I think regulation work doesn't take away the fact that we'll continue to be driven and ambitious and passionate. However, when we hold so much of our ability to love ourselves in those external factors or in those things that we can show off, materials or, certifications or GPAs or whatever, there's too much instability in our ability to come back and care about ourselves when those things inevitably through adulthood get rocked a little bit.
Yep.
So I pushed myself to the absolute brink. Looking back, of course, I see that this was years in the making, but my story is I was working in international health. It was, a high impact career. It was super rewarding, but also very demanding. A lot of international time zones and really early meetings and just, navigating so many different cultures as well. And what felt like in 2 days, I hit what is called a dorsal vagal shutdown, which for those who aren't familiar with nervous system states, you can think about that as like severe burnout. So to the point where 2 nights before I was out socializing after work, but really felt almost robotic, kind of like I was scripting my life. I was, I knew the right thing to say or the right way to act because I had become so hyper-focused on this perfection that I had to display. To 2 days later being bedridden and needing to take an emergency medical leave of almost a year, and really contemplating if I wanted to continue living. And it was a shock. And a lot of people in my life couldn't put the 2 images together of somebody who was always seen as confident, having it together, seen as always happy, seen as like the emotionally mature one, right? Which was really, again, just language I was sharing because I'm very smart, but not actually practicing back on myself, right? To somebody who couldn't even respond to a text or somebody who couldn't even work anymore, right? Thankfully, at that time, I had my mother and she showed up for me in like just a capacity I couldn't even explain on this call if I tried, because until I really got to the point where I was like, I'm going to do something about this. You know what? I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to save myself. I couldn't even shower or brush my teeth. And I am somebody who has never in my past experienced depression, anxiety, right? But I believe that is because I had become so on autopilot to not process the things that I had gone through that I couldn't feel those things. So I really truly believed I was perfectly fine. And then all of a sudden I'm hit with this. And this is really the driver, of course, and how I ended up in this work, but also an important story that I don't like to share for a fear factor. But my mission as a coach, as a business owner, is to make sure that no woman ever has to get to that point before getting support, because I am stubborn. I really pushed it to the last minute, right? And so, and it felt like it snuck up on me. That kind of set me on my journey. I spent so much money and time and I traveled across the country and I tried so many different things. And what I always share is that some of the things moved the needle and they helped, but a lot of them actually made it worse. And that was really the foundation for my program, which was not only putting together all the things that not only worked for me, but I'm a researcher, right? I come from a master's background. So are scientifically backed to support the nervous system, but also making sure the things that are just trends and hyped and all of that don't work for somebody who's dysregulated. We're not talking about people who are regulated, right? Don't come into the program and don't make people feel like they're even further sent into their dysregulation.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Let me ask you this, because I feel like your story, I resonate with your story. I had a situation, early on when I first started my first business where it was so strange. Something just hit and I couldn't get out of bed. And same like you, always been a high performer, always been like the happy-go-lucky. And I remember my sister's like, what is wrong with you? Like I couldn't even change out of the clothes that I was in. And, I was like, I just felt broken. Did you feel like, and I look back in that time and it felt like I was a slow simmering pot that was about to boil. Did you, kind of in the lead up to, really what, was a catalyst in your life, did you feel, were there signs, were there things that you recognized and, hey, I'm not feeling it today, or invites to a party feel like a lot. Like I can still go and perform, but these things that used to give me joy don't give me joy. Like were there signs there?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. So in my story, specifically, one thing that I think kind of throws people a little bit is socializing became an addiction for me to achieve dopamine, right? And so a lot of people think about leading up to a burnout or a shutdown as we start to become more introverted and isolated. And this is true for many of us.
Right.
For me, I couldn't have a night in on my own. I had to be out. I was drinking too much, but even if I wasn't drinking, I was out every night with people because it made me feel like, okay, I have some type of high, some type of connection, some type of something, and I don't have to be alone with my thoughts. That was actually the greatest indication to me, is that I was just on, a constant, like, wake up 4 or 5 a.m. to coach Pilates, go to work, do my job, come off work, and was working from home at that point as well, which is difficult because you're very in your own space, right? And then go right on out to meet friends and meet, colleagues. Sometimes I would just go out by myself and sit at a bar just so I could like have social interaction, right? And I think that this was one of the reasons that nobody saw it coming, because I looked like I was just, it wasn't like I was out partying and then not showing up to my job, or not showing up for my coaching, or not my Pilates coaching before I was doing it part-time and all of that, until it was, but I hid it so well. So we remember we're high achievers. We are really smart women. I always say, I don't need to teach anything these women, any of the women I coach, more about their minds. They're good. They can write a book, right? And so we're really good at hiding that we're not okay. And that's a protection mechanism. It's not something we should judge ourselves on. It's not something that we should feel, bad about, or, say, well, I didn't ask for help. It's my fault. I'm the reason I'm like this. But that is fierce protection, and we're really good at it. So I will say a couple of the signs that I now look back on and see, right? One was the over socializing. One was over exercising, right? So I was constantly working out or coaching, and I was, not eating enough, right? So it was just go, go, go. But I was also, when I did eat, hyper healthy, minus the amount that I was also drinking, which was way too much. I was drinking every day, and even if I wasn't drinking to the point of getting drunk every day, it was something to kind of shut the mind off, right? And so a lot of us see a glass of wine every night as just totally normal, right? And I will say everyone's going to have their own boundaries with it, but the goal is that we wouldn't need that to cap our day, to feel like we can relax, that we can create our own physical cue for relaxation, and that we don't have to rely on something external.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, I feel like people don't realize they start to get on down patterns that these things are normal. It's like the glass of wine becomes 3, then the, healthy eating becomes, then I'm restricting, like you start controlling more, and not realizing, kind of the slippery slope that you could be on, honestly.
Yeah.
I want to back up and actually ask a very basic question before we dive deeper into talking about the nervous system. What is the nervous system? If you could break down at a very elementary, break it down for me, because it's, I hear all these things, people talking about parasympathetic, so on and so forth. I want to make sure that, for myself and our viewers, we actually have a primer on what the nervous system actually is, the components, before we dive into talking about regulation and other things.
Absolutely. So we have a couple different nervous systems, right? But when we are talking about nervous system regulation from a coming out of survival mode capacity, we are talking about our autonomic nervous system. And this is what controls either our stress response, our fight, flight, freeze, or you could call it a protective response as well. and our rest and digest, or kind of ability to, know that things are okay. So if you think about an animal being chased, of course, they should be sent into a sympathetic state, a fight, flight, get out of there, run from the predator. But they should also be able to re-regulate on the other end, so they're not constantly living their lives in stress, so that they can go back out and try and get food again without being so afraid and so hypervigilant that they never do that again, and then they starve to death. Right? And so our system is looking for homeostasis, yes, but what I always remind my clients is that when stressful things happen, you should feel stressed, right? It's just that when something that shouldn't really be that stressful, when the reaction doesn't match the event, is an indication of when we are overactivated. Our capacity is, so low for adding in any more stress that even the smallest thing, an email from your boss or a text from a friend starts to feel too overwhelming to even look at, think about, do anything with, right? If we're in a survival situation, you and I are both from LA, the LA wildfires, I told all my clients it would be weird if I wasn't stressed, right? We're not looking to just be calm and chill all the time. That's not what regulation is. But when it's something like, my ability to return an Amazon package or send a letter in the mail, I shouldn't feel like that is just too much for me to even think about, because I am so up to here. My cumulative burden of stress is so high that I can't even fathom adding in even the smallest little task.
What are the different states of the nervous system too?
Yeah, absolutely. So the different stages of kind of where the nervous system can go and kind of shut down into. Yeah. So polyvagal theory teaches us that there are essentially 3 different states, but imagine them all on a ladder, right? So we're very rarely in just purely one state. Right? And so at the top of that ladder is our safe and social state. This is where we are feeling connected. We are feeling, like we can be open, vulnerable, that we can handle what life brings us, right? And then as we go down the ladder, we get into our sympathetic or our kind of fight flight state. And this does not include freeze, because freeze is actually a response to fight flight, and I'll explain that in a second. But this is where we're feeling tons of irritability. Maybe we're shooting awake at 3 or 4 in the morning. We maybe feel shaky. We have tons of gut issues, right? Like everything is just very activated. And then as you move further down the ladder to the final state, this is our freeze or dorsal vagal shutdown. And that is what I hit. And that is where the body essentially recognizes its final protection mechanism against the high level of stress you've been living in that fight flight state, is too much to bear. So it's going to numb you out to the experience altogether. Now, a lot of women fall somewhere in between the kind of sympathetic and the dorsal vagal shutdown. And we've seen this on Instagram as like a functional freeze, right? Like I can crush it at work, but I crash at the end of the day. We're on this kind of like roller coaster.
Exactly.
And so what polyvagal theory teaches us is that to come out of any state of freeze, we have to go back up the ladder, meaning we have to feel the feelings we shut down to in the first place. And this is what makes regulation work at times really challenging, because it can feel like we're getting worse before we're getting better, even though it's just that we're feeling it again, right? And why it's so important to work with practitioners who are well versed in the nervous system, rather than just self-paced courses or like somebody who tells you, you have to do this, this is my method, because resistance is important data for us on how we need to adjust to keep the nervous system feeling safe with the process.
Right. I want to talk about something that I was just talking to a group of girlfriends the other day, and, one was saying, she's like, I just feel really numb in my life. I feel really numb. Another was talking about just feeling stuck. And, this is language that I hear often, all the time. Like, I feel stuck, I feel numb. With respect to the nervous system, those feelings of being stuck, being numb, how do you interpret that when a client comes to you or someone comes to you? What does that mean? Does that mean that there's something in their nervous system that's screaming for regulation? Walk me through how to unpack that, the language that we often commonly use of numb or stuck or, I feel lost, those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So with my clients, I'm working with clients who are in a stuck, dysregulated state, right? So again, if we have a stressful event, we're going to have a survival response. So we may go into fight flight. We may even, shut down into freeze for a little bit if it's something that's particularly triggering from our past, right? Just depending on how our system responds to a certain event. But the difference is in that situation, we can recover. So even though it happens, even if it's a little bit slow, right? I think we always rush healing a little too much in society, especially grief,
So
right?
true.
But we work our way out of it, we get through it, we come back to ourselves. When we get stuck, it is because we are so constantly feeling like we are under attack, needing to survive, needing to protect. Our safety need is hardly met, right? So if we're wired biologically towards survival, we want regulation and creativity and thriving and living our best lives and feeling joy, we have to feel safe first, right? Because that's our biological need. And so when I hear words like numb or stuck or lost, that indicates to me that a client has gone beyond just the here and there kind of stressful days or activated states and is actually starting to live in a state of chronic dysregulation, chronic stress.
Wow. Curious too, we live in a society that's always on, and I almost feel like burnout and hustle and those types of things are common. What is your advice in a world where it feels like if you slow down, you're falling behind? How do we protect ourselves? How do we unpack that? Walk me through some thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to tell my clients that when they do this work, it's their own little revolution against the man, against the system, whatever it is, right? Because if we are living in capitalism, our worth is supposed to be tied to our output. And it's the lie that we're all spoon fed growing up. And, all it leaves us is empty, unfulfilled, and maybe losing a job where we just get filled in for right away, right? And so there is a need to we talk about like kind of coming out of the matrix, right? Kind of seeing the overarching agenda here and recognizing that at the end of the day, who you're left with is yourself, right? And regulation work is so important because you can intellectually know that and then emotionally not believe it. And so I work with so many women who know they want to feel better, know that their job shouldn't be their absolute priority, know that they should be prioritizing themselves, really, really know it consciously, intellectually. But they continue to take actions that don't support that. They don't prioritize their self-care. They don't prioritize breaks or maybe finding a job or a role that is more aligned with whatever they need to be able to have space to support themselves. And that is because if the subconscious still believes a way of behaving is protective to us more than not doing so, we're going to keep doing it. And so if we kind of go back to some of those beliefs when we're children, right? If we're being fed that our worth is our output and our subconscious learns that that's a protective behavior, then there's no way we're thinking our way out of that one. We're going to keep doing it no matter how much we want to stop. That's cognitive dissonance, the clash between the conscious and subconscious. So when I am giving advice to women on all of this, often I say, you're not there yet. Like you can intellectually know that and you don't have to emotionally believe me at all, right? But where we can start is from a level of integrated regulation. So looking at, throughout the day, okay, if I have time to run to the bathroom or make myself breakfast or whatever, take 5 minutes. And a lot of us say, oh, no, I can't. And it's like, no, actually you could step away from the computer. And so sometimes there's some safety building around just even being able to disconnect for a few moments. And if I know how to move my body and work with my body or get out what I need on a given day by listening to it, by having somatic awareness, then it only takes a few times a day for a few minutes to really start to shift some of my emotional states, to shift some of my stress, and to come back to myself. Absolutely. That takes time and practice, right? But eventually we do get there.
What is somatic awareness and how does that feel? How can you integrate that in your daily life?
So soma is just of the body, right? And somatic awareness is being able to notice things that are going on in your body. So something we often see with women who are in freeze is they actually cannot describe kind of physical descriptors of what's happening in their body. So they might describe a pain in their shoulder as coming from anxiety or like tightness, but if I ask them to go deeper than those kind of surface level or conventional terms, they are unable to connect into what's really happening here. And so somatic awareness is the ability to notice what's happening in your body. And then the next step with that is, what do I need to take to make my body feel safer? Right? It's also important to notice when our bodies are feeling joy, or they are feeling, lightness, or they are feeling, relaxation. Because constantly in the health space, we are told that sitting with our emotions is just sitting with the uncomfortable ones. And of course we don't want to do that, because that sounds awful. It's like a punishment, right?
Exactly. Who's signing up for this?
Right.
Right.
And so much of my work, you would think, is teaching women to notice discomfort in their bodies. I would say the vast majority is teaching women to notice that despite a discomfort in their body, they can also find spaces of okayness, of safety, of joy even. And then they can further enhance that through their movements. So they can really take control of, I am not just my pain. I am not just my discomfort. I am not just one experience of a person. And that allows the subconscious to realize, okay, this isn't actually going to get us. It's not going to kill us, right? It exists here. And I can find okayness despite it.
Yes, I love the yes and. I love that. There's always, I live for the and in situations, and I think that it's an important thing. I've heard you use the term safety in your body as we've been talking about. And it's something that I realize that a lot of us haven't been taught what that actually feels like. What does it mean to be safe in your body? You talked about, celebrating feelings of joy and happiness and being able to recognize that. Walk me through what safety in your body feels like at a deep level, and how to honor when you're feeling joy and happiness and levity. It's something that, I'm just thinking about my own experience in my life. I don't think there's been one person that's ever told me to celebrate when I'm feeling joy or levity. Maybe that speaks a lot about, but yeah, no one's actually ever said that. So, just curious on your perspective, and how do we recognize those things? How do we celebrate those things?
Absolutely. I mean, I have a daily joy ritual, and I prescribe dance parties to my clients, and I prescribe, going into areas that you I call it an inventory of the body. A scan feels very medical to me and intense, right? So an inventory of the body. Where's a space that feels nice? You don't have to know why, right? Like the palm of your hand. Where within this space feels extra nice, right? Can you do anything with the palm of your hand to make it feel even better? Because the subconscious works through reward systems. So traditional psychodynamic approaches told us that if we go back and look at all our triggers and all of the things that make us, act in certain ways, and we process them and we avoid them, that we're going to feel better. But all this did was reward intellectualization, rewarded, building the web of our past and aha moments of, I'm this way because this happened to me, and I'm this way because that happened to me. And then we still didn't feel any better. And that's because neuroscience is now showing us that to shift a behavior, we actually have to shift the reward that we believe the behavior is giving us or not giving us.
Yes.
Right? And so to me, safety in the body, I always speak about how regulation, it's a superpower, because it has built in me and built in my clients who have, completed my program, an unshakable deep self-trust. So when we are in survival mode, we really can't tell the difference between anxiety and fear-motivated actions and intuition. Because we are so living in fear, our gut will tell us yes, no, and what we often find in survival mode, if not all the time, is that's motivated by fear. That's motivated by fear of taking risks, of staying in what's comfortable instead of what's uncertain, of, already shutting ourselves down and saying that we're not going to succeed, so we don't even risk that we will fail. I don't believe in failures. I believe in lessons, but this idea in our minds, right?
Same.
And so safety in the body to me is being able to actually discern what is your intuition. It's being able to know that no matter what, you are going to be okay, foundationally, emotionally, not just intellectually, so that you can take the risk Because even if the risk doesn't pan out the way you thought, you're going to be fine. You're going to learn from
Right.
it. You're going to find your way back, and it's not going to shatter your world. And that is why nervous system regulation work is so powerful for both moms and career women, because it allows them to elevate to a level where they are able to put themselves out there, to model, leadership and speaking their voice, and then carry that through the way that they show up, either if it's your full-time job as a mother or your full-time job as a career woman.
Right, right. And I heard you once say something about, you talked about, living in a state of fear just now. And I heard you once say something about living in a state of fear versus living in a state of expansion. And I love that. I love that. How do we get to a place where we are living in a state of expansion? What are some maybe mindset shifts, limiting beliefs, then moving into the nervous system regulation end of things that could help us be on a journey to getting there?
Yeah. So this is a big question, right? This is kind of what my whole program does. And what I will say it's not is approaching our healing solely from the conscious mind.
Yeah.
If we are only coming in from the conscious mind, we are neglecting arguably our more powerful mind, our survival and subconscious mind. And we're neglecting our body. We're really disconnecting ourselves, thinking that we can logic our way into and out of everything. And that's often what we've been taught or rewarded for, again, in things like school or in our careers, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we truly want to expand, I think about this in terms of the window of tolerance. So you may have heard about this. The window of tolerance is our ability or our capacity to handle stress. And so there's two things we're looking for when we want to be in a more expanded state or to know that we're in a more expanded state. One is that our response to a stressful event is appropriate. So, an email from somebody who's annoying or whatever doesn't rock our world. It may be like, oh, it's a little sticky, but I'm able to respond and remember that that has more to do with them than it has to do with me, and I'm just going to do my job.
Right.
However, like we spoke about, an actual survival situation, like the wildfires, you should have a stress response and kind of go into, all right, what am I doing here? How am I planning? The second thing we're looking for is that we have an appropriate time from the stressful event that we can achieve regulation again, or that kind of safe and social state. And so this is going to vary from person to person. And I have lots of beef with programs that say everyone do it this way. And this is the process. Because I've never had a client do it the same way as another one in my program, right?
We're all different.
We're all different.
Right.
But we can know in this kind of intuitive knowing, this emotional knowing, when we are having an overreaction, when it feels like we're in some ways out of body, that wasn't us, that isn't how we wanted to respond, that isn't how we usually respond, or that wasn't an appropriate response. So when we're talking about expanding the window of tolerance, we're talking about how much we can wave in between states of hyperarousal and hypoarousal without getting to either one. So we don't want to be in super hyperarousal, we don't want to be in super hypoarousal, right? Really shut down. And so we might start here. And so any little thing that kind of rocks our world sends us into one of those states. As we expand it, it takes more and more to send us into one of those states.
Got it. I have so much to ask on window of tolerance, but before I forget, I do want to pause and talk about burnout, because I think it's something that, there's a relation there, So many people are in a state of burnout. Would you say that there's a way to overcome burnout by, expanding your window of tolerance? Are they correlated? Is there any relation there? And I want to ask another question. I feel like most of the times when I talk to people about burnout, it's their job. It feels like it's the number one culprit of burnout. It's like, man, this job is just driving me to burnout. There's other things, maybe family life, financial situation, so on and so forth. Do you feel like there's a way to overcome burnout, to heal from burnout, that doesn't involve quitting your job, especially if you need it for financial purposes? So, multi-questions packed in one, but kind of on this train of thought of thinking, how do we overcome burnout? Are there tools that help us to be more resilient, help us to expand that window of tolerance? Or is it saying hey, no, my life isn't working. That's why I'm constantly burned out. I need to kind of abandon ship and move to a different, and re-architect, reconstruct my life.
Yeah, absolutely. So burnout and dysregulation are intrinsically linked because
Right.
burnout is a protective mechanism to a high level of stress. So it is, a burnout state would be closer to that freeze state that we were speaking about
Got
on
it.
the ladder. And that is protection. It's kind of shutting us down because our body's going, enough. I can't keep working these 60+ hour weeks. I can't keep doing 100 tasks at once. I can't keep working the role of 3 people because I haven't hired somebody yet or whatever, right?
Right.
And so there definitely is a need to personally discern what is, a boundary or boundaries that are necessary in my life as who I am as a person. How do I want to live? But then also recognizing that there are individuals who work the same job or similar as you who don't hit burnout.
Right.
And the reason for this is they don't put so much personal attachment to their work. So they see work as work, they can leave it and they can go home, right? And then they can disconnect from it because they don't, again, put their worth, their value into their output. And this is why I work with ambitious, driven women because we are such a unique breed where we all have that belief of a mix of perfectionism, people pleasing, and worth and value equals output. Worth and value equals how I show up for others, how much money I make, my success, whatever it is. And so we can't just leave it at work. And setting boundaries in that situation, it doesn't matter if you only worked 20 hours a week. If you are so, concerned constantly about the job and thinking about the career and thinking about, how well you're showing up, or I didn't do that right, here's another mistake I made, then you're going to burn out, whether you're working 60-hour weeks or 10-hour weeks, right? And so much of burnout has to do with the belief systems that we hold. However, of course, no one is designed to be working. I don't even think people are designed to be working, sitting at a laptop for 8 hours, right?
Me either.
It's
No.
it's not right.
It's not right.
Exactly. And so in a society that, again, you talked about financial need that has that structure and we need to work, right? That is where we talk about the importance of, okay, your boundary then needs to be, I'm going to take these breaks. I'm going to incorporate movement into my day. I'm going to find ways to stimulate my vagus nerve while I'm literally sitting on a call.
Right.
And at least once a week, maybe more, maybe less, depending on the individual, we need to go into a deeper root cause healing practice because otherwise we're not preventing stress from coming up. We're just managing it as it's already there. And that can feel like a prison. That can feel like a cycle, right? And so it is a two-pronged approach of, yes, we need stress management tools, especially when we're already dysregulated. We're living in stress. Of course, we're managing it, right? But eventually we need to, as we start to feel better, start doing these practices when we feel good so that we don't get to a space where we feel so burdened and overwhelmed by our stress that we go back into burnout.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. You talked about stimulating your vagus nerve during a call.
Yeah.
How do you do that? What is the technique?
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of techniques. What I always tell my clients is you don't need to feel like there's another task on your plate, especially when you're starting out. In the future, fine. Because in the future, all of this work, vagal toning, somatics, hypnosis, visualization, it's all going to feel rewarded in your system. You're going to crave it. You're going to be like, ooh, I can't wait to move my body and do this. It's going to be a lifestyle. But until you build those rewards, it's going to feel like an extra task. And you're not already prioritizing yourself. That's probably a part of why you hit dysregulation. So why would you start now just because somebody told you to? It's going to take time to build up that motivation. And so in the beginning, it can be as small as, a nice ear massage as you're sitting on a call, just kind of subtle, right? And you're stimulating the vagus nerve here. Yeah. And it feels really nice. And this is a super tingly one. When you're not on a call, take 2 minutes, right? Sway a little bit. And then shift your gaze left to right for a few moments just to allow your mind to process a little bit more about, through bilateral stimulation, what's going on in your environment and come back to self. Right. I am constantly like swaying on calls with clients,
I
just
love
like this,
that.
getting that left to
Oh,
right, getting a little bit of repetition that
right.
signals to my parasympathetic I'm safe. And then I can pause and I can come back. But it's not as weird as we think it is, right? And you would hardly even notice if I
Right.
hadn't kind of spoken to it. And so it really is just about recognizing that we are not built to be these robots that just sit there perfectly at our desks all day, no movement, suppressing everything we want to say. Now, the other
Exactly.
thing I say as well is remember that somatic work is around also completing the cycle. And so as, stimulating our vagus nerve can support our parasympathetic. Our vagus nerve is the largest nerve in our parasympathetic system. But we often have to go even further than just bringing vagal tone up. And if we wished we could have yelled at somebody, but we bit our tongue because we're adults, it was more appropriate, we wanted to act, more emotionally mature, whatever. Maybe it was good we bit our tongue. Maybe it wasn't a safe situation to speak out. Then I want you to go outside and like say everything that you wish you could have said and like push the air and pretend that you're like pushing that person back and whether you have to like slap them across the face. And I always say it's completing the cycle of the energy that they brought. So you don't have to feel guilty that you're like
Ah,
beating somebody up that might be
right.
somebody you really love, but
Right.
whatever they brought to you that made you feel like, ooh, I need to protect myself, push that energy away in a way
Right.
that feels like you've done what you needed to do that you wish you could have done in the moment.
Wow, boy, I need to do that with some people. I like think there goes my cough. Yeah, that's actually good because I feel like a lot of times we're told, you know, yes, you need to be the adult, be the bigger person,
Mhm.
and those emotions stay stuck, and we go into a cycle of blame. I may be speaking for myself. I'm like, oh, how terrible of me that I want to kind of slap that person off, but upside the
Yeah.
head. That's like
Yep.
such a poor thought. And then when you go into the cycle of like, how could I be like that? So on and so forth. Would you say that self-blame actually has a role in dysregulation and, going to these cycles of being really hard on yourself? I think it's also very perfectionist behavior.
Yeah.
How do you think that that plays a role into ending up in dysregulation?
The very first thing I work with my clients on is reshaping how they speak to themselves.
Yeah.
And we do this through, a mix of work of visualizations, inner child work. We
Right.
call our workshopping kind of stepping stone beliefs. I don't know if you've ever tried to repeat a positive affirmation to yourself that you don't believe in the
Oh,
mirror and
yeah.
just like cringed and been like, ugh, right? That's literally the body rejecting it and you're creating further conflict, right? So
Right.
when we self-blame, in some ways it feels safer than saying, no, it's actually okay, I'm human, when we hold such a strong belief that we're not worthy or we're not lovable unless we do X, right? And so self-blame absolutely contributes to dysregulation because it keeps us small and it keeps us, especially as women, feeling that we're going to be called crazy or over the top or too emotional if we allow out how we're actually feeling. This is why anger is my favorite emotion. So
Yeah.
anger is a secondary emotion. It protects sadness, vulnerability, hurt, right? So it's a protection mechanism and an emotion. It's very interesting.
Right.
And I think feminine rage is like so powerful. When you
Agreed.
can learn how to be with it, release it, but keep some of it as a driver for change, when you can learn and use it to say, my voice matters and I'm going to speak up for what I believe in, you just become this absolute force to be reckoned with, right?
Yes.
And so a lot of the work, especially early on in regulation work, is starting to shift the mindset from one of the way that I acted is something I should be ashamed of or something I should
Right.
judge myself for or something I should nitpick at myself for, to the way that I acted makes a lot of sense given what's going on in my
Yes.
life, and it is
Yes.
trying to protect me. There's
Yes.
no such thing as self-sabotage. And
Right.
once we can show an individual that from an emotional, again, level, not just intellectually, then they start to recognize that actually no one is really, very few people, if, right, maybe like sociopaths or psychopaths, but very few people are doing stuff seriously for the sake of being malicious only. It is all protection mechanisms and all ways that we
Right.
are kind of going into that survival, that trying to protect self. And that is so beyond our ability to consciously control in certain
Right.
situations.
Right, right. I love that you said that, kind of shifting the worldview. I think for me, one of the most powerful things was shifting my worldview, saying the world is benevolent. Most people are trying to do the best with the resources that they have. And if someone does something that, like, frankly pisses me off, it's okay to feel mad. It's okay to be angry and to not try to repress the emotions, talk myself out of it. Because for me, at least, it was creating this loop of, that's the only way to describe it. Like that feeling of in your body that I feel like causes, at least for me, stress and contributes to more burnout. And, because you're never able to, I love that exercise of just going out and saying what you would have said because,
Yeah.
how freeing, to
Totally.
be able to harness that anger versus be shamed for having it, which I think a lot of times we are.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to, contribute to that is I always say there is no emotional stressor that isn't also a physical stressor. Right.
Yes,
So
so true.
literally, when we have any emotional situation, whether it's that we suppress or whether it's that we do rage and then we're like, oh, shoot, I shouldn't have done that or I went over the
Right.
top or whatever, our body braces, it activates, right? We are holding things based on those stressors. And
Right.
often our bodies pick up on the fact that we're stressed before our conscious mind does, right? We think that anxiety comes on suddenly because we now, feel anxious in our mind or we're ruminating or whatever. But when we build that somatic awareness, like we were talking about, we actually often see that the body has already picked up on things in our environment and surroundings. If you've ever felt like somebody is behind you, you can't see
Yes.
them, but you know they
Yes.
are. The
Yes.
body is picking up on all of these cues, all of this data, and so is the subconscious mind, that by the time we consciously recognize something, if we do not have good awareness into our bodies, it's already been building for so long.
Right.
This is why
Right.
women will share with me, I was sitting on the freaking couch and I had a panic attack. Nothing was going on, right?
Wow.
And it's not so much about trying to figure out, okay, what exactly led up to that in the last couple of
Right.
days. It's more just knowing that something did. And what do I
Exactly.
do with it now? Because if we
Exactly.
spend too much time trying to figure out what is all that data our body and subconscious picked up, we're never going to understand. I have weird dreams all the time. I don't know what's going on in my subconscious,
Right.
right? So I'm going to waste energy trying to be like, well, was it because of this or is this person or this trigger, when it could have just been that the light hit weird and it reminded my subconscious of some memory way back when. And how am I going to control that?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So fascinating. And I think what's fascinating is your practice and technique. I'd love to go into soma neuro alignment,
Yeah.
what your technique is, walk me through the process. And I would love to know how you came up with your proprietary process and technique.
Absolutely. So Soma neuroalignment is an advanced technique. So my program with clients is a year long. There's a 6-month intensive and a 6-month aftercare. And this is not because
Okay.
it takes that long to heal. It is because
Right.
I don't know how somebody who is dysregulated could just jump in day one and do
Right.
everything. And in fact, if I see that, I actually think, oh, they're on autopilot. They're trying to get an A+ in healing. And I say, slow down. We got to slow it down. And if we really want things to set in a foundational way, we actually need to go slow. Going slow is the better approach than trying to
Right.
get through it as fast as we can. And that's really tough to shift from when you're somebody who's in a fix it, quick fix mentality, somebody who's a high achiever and always gets things very quickly given to them, right? But actually, it's essential to us being able to
Right.
heal in a sustainable way. And so Soma neuroalignment was built out of my experience realizing that there were these great practices like hypnotism or visualization or other subconscious works and storytelling around like parts work or inner child work, right? But whenever somebody tried to take me through that, a practitioner who was specialized in that area, I couldn't think about anything but my to-do list or all the things that I was worrying about or all the things in the future, all the things in the past. So I'd probably get about 5 to 10 minutes of relaxation at the end and then it's over.
Right. Right.
How can we expect women who are dysregulated to sit their bodies still and clear their minds to get the benefit of these practices that have great promise if we can't get them to feel relaxed enough first? And so Soma being of the body, neuro of the mind, starts with somatics to deactivate the body, to allow the conscious mind time to actually start to come down into a reduced brainwave frequency, a more unconscious state, where the body registers. We've been doing these movements for a while, repetition, really, we're focusing on joy and like what feels good and like little massages and all of that. Supportive postures, right? Sometimes expansive postures. And so after a while, and it does take a while, we're not talking like 2 minutes until you're regulated enough that you can kind of drop in, right? The mind will register, okay, we actually are safe right now. So we can let the conscious mind shut off a little bit.
Wow.
We can come into that more unconscious state. And this, I always say, is similar to if you've ever gotten a massage and been like in and out of sleep, you know?
Yes, yep.
And so you're coming into that reduced brainwave frequency, that alpha or sometimes theta state, where even though you feel like you kind of fell asleep, you also wake up when they're done. So you know you weren't fully asleep, right? And that's exactly the state that we want to practice these subconscious tools. Otherwise, we're just speaking to the conscious mind. So it's a technique that combines both approaches so that we can actually get the benefit of the body-based healing and the subconscious-based healing. And when we do this in a preventative way, right? So not just because we're feeling stressed. In fact, we want to make sure it's not just when we're feeling stressed, or we'll create associations between stress and these practices. Then we allow ourselves to enhance the feelings of joy and connection that we're experiencing that day, rather than, again, like we spoke about, just trying to treat or fix whenever we're feeling off.
Right. Yeah, we live in a society, I feel like, unfortunately, that waits until things are broken. You know, it's like, let's push the car until it's completely broken down. And then we're like, okay, now it needs to get fixed in 10 minutes, you know, which is, it's not realistic. I'd love to know for you and all the work that you've done, like, because people, and I'm going to ask, kind of a counterintuitive question. Where can people, like, thinking about soma neural alignment, thinking about the journey to healing, where can someone begin? Like where does someone even start? And I feel like just in the conversations I have, there's a lot of fear in addressing this. Like it's like, man, I don't know if this is going to work. Hey, I don't really have time for this. I don't how do you start to unpack and get someone to a place where it's like, hey, here's a first step. Here is a way to shift the thinking from this is going to be a 10-minute thing to, hey, this is a journey and it's worth the investment. Walk me maybe through some of the narrative that you have with your clients and getting them ready.
Yeah. So before someone joins my program, I'm like the least salesy person ever, right? And I actually never ask for yes or no's on calls because I don't want anyone to join who doesn't feel safe enough to join. However, I wouldn't want somebody to put off their healing solely out of fear, right? And so there's always walking that line. One thing that I love to kind of just say is like, of course you're freaked out, right? You've just been living in risk averseness for years. You've been in survival mode. You're in a hypervigilant state. Why wouldn't you feel scared about joining this? You might be really excited and know it's right for you, but then the idea of, okay, even if everyone has succeeded before me, I'm so broken, I'm different, I'm not going to get there. So a lot of my role before somebody even becomes a client is constant reassurance, validation, checking in, not to be like, are you joining my program? But like, how are you feeling? We just brought up a lot on a call. Be a human, right? And allow the women who are speaking to you to see and feel that this is their first step of autonomy, where somebody isn't pressuring them and pushing them and is instead showing up and supporting them. And then they make that decision to join. And that's already power that they've claimed back. Like, I made this decision. Right? And that is why I'm also okay if somebody makes a decision not to join, because many times those women either come back later on or maybe they don't, but they just made a decision for themselves, and that is healing in and of itself, right? And so I'm happy for them that they did that. Of course, I want everyone to heal, and I want, there's times where I'm like, oh, I really wish you would have, because I just see that this would be so perfect for you, of course, but I also have to trust that these are smart women and they will have their own journeys. Now,
Absolutely.
with my clients, when they come into my program, the very first thing I do is have them start tracking wins. We don't use
Right.
gratitude in my program. And here's why. Well, you can have gratitude, but we don't explicitly say like gratitude lists. Gratitude is outcomes focused, as we are in society. Something good has to have happened that you feel grateful for you to put it on your list.
Wow.
Healing,
Yeah.
no one's grateful to be in my program. I always say they're happy they found it. They're happy to work with me,
Yes.
but nobody's grateful they're there, right? Like, let's not pretend this is
Right.
like so fun, right?
Right.
And so instead, when we're tracking wins, I explain it like this. If you want to stop eating the whole pan of brownies every night of the week, right? And your goal is to completely stop. And you only measure success by when you completely stop eating any pan of any brownie any night of the week. You are so far. And you
Yeah.
are going to constantly see days as failures
Right.
instead of seeing them as progress. And
Right.
so gratitude is outcomes focused, wins are progress focused. So if I paused for 30 seconds every day this week before I ate the pan, 30 seconds longer than I normally would, that's a win. If I ate just part of it,
Mm.
that's a win. If I did it every other night, that's a win, right? And so I always say it's internal shifts. So it's not a win that it was sunny outside today or that like you went and got ice cream, but instead it's a win of the way that you spoke to yourself, the way that you thought about a behavior, even if you took it, but you thought a little more about maybe not, and like started to bring that narrative in, that you considered doing something is a win. And there's a lot of pushback to this, right? Because it's like, I am so used to being this high productivity, like super
Right.
overachiever, and now I'm celebrating that I thought about maybe doing something. Fine. That's okay. You don't have to feel grateful for it. You still have to write it down and celebrate it because it starts to shift the subconscious toward this belief of, oh, things are changing. We are getting better. There is
Right.
hope.
Right. Right. I love the idea of celebrating wins because versus, like I keep a gratitude journal. I think it's really a powerful thing, but, just celebrating wins because I think it's important to celebrate the journey. And a lot of times especially if you're a high performer, high achiever, the journey, it's almost like the means to get to the end. And you're just like, yeah, whatever. I want to get to the end as quickly as possible. But, slowing down and recognizing the progress that you're making through wins, I think is incredibly, incredibly powerful.
Yes.
One thing I want to ask, speaking of that, I feel like oftentimes, especially with high performers, there's like this element of, well, if I'm celebrating the wins, isn't that like a cop out? Am I being lazy? Like, am I not really going full throttle and full hustle mode? Like, I hear all types of manifestations of language, of people trying to unpack and describe this. What would you say to that? And, something I've been really fascinated about is like this concept of like deep rest and like just giving yourself space to actually rest. Like, what does deep rest mean for you? And then how do we combat that voice of you're just being lazy, you're just, taking your foot off the gas and so on and so forth?
So I just said this on a call that I was,
Right.
leading for a group. And I said, none of you are going to believe me until you're there. Laziness doesn't exist, right? If everything is
Yeah.
protective in us,
Right.
then
Right.
laziness is just either our body trying to force us to slow down because we've been going too fast, or some type of resistance to something. It's trying to indicate to us, you're not lazy, you just don't want to do that because something is off either with
Yeah.
what you need to do or think you need to do or how much you've been doing and now you can't even like do the small tasks. Laziness
Right.
doesn't exist. Self-sabotage doesn't exist, okay? So in my mind and in the way I understand the nervous system at least. And so there is no judgment. I tell my clients all the time, if you do absolutely zero, I don't care. I just want to know that you've done absolutely zero so I can inform my approach and adjust how we're going about this. Because that's, again, information for me of, okay, this stuff is
Right.
causing enough resistance that you're completely shutting down to it. How are we going to adapt? Is it going to be more sessions with me for a little bit? Is it going to be getting you to do something that doesn't even feel like regulation work, but it is helping you to regulate, right?
Right. 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 Right.
And the way that I like to reframe rest is if you think about, I mean, it's so freaking cool. If I am sitting down, not moving my body, thinking I'm doing nothing, my body inside, under my skin, is doing like hundreds and hundreds of actions to support me.
So true.
I am literally rejuvenating and restoring without lifting a finger. That is how
Right.
much my body loves me. And
Mm.
so rest to me it's not a non-negotiable, right? Or excuse me, rest to me, it's a non-negotiable, right? That rest is not a luxury. It's an essential part of the process.
So true. I'm
How
like,
can we restore, right?
I'm clapping. Yes.
Yeah, right? And so if you just think about, like, if you literally just you're resting and you just look at your hand and you just think about like all the blood pumping through there and all of the cells that are literally rebuilding and all of the ways that your muscles are loosening after you've, been typing all day, you're like, oh my God, there's literally healing happening right here as I don't do anything and I look at my hand. And that can often be a really important grounding reframe for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just wish we would shift the conversation around rest, especially, I hate to say this, in the United States. Like, I talk to my friends that live in other countries, and there's more of an emphasis of taking time, far niente, and whereas here, it's like, you're like, yeah, I just spent the Saturday relaxing or hanging out, or, I took a little, people are like, what do you mean? You're not in grind mode? I'm like, what? Where is this coming from? I find it to be so peculiar. Like, it's just, I think there's a way to do things and be successful and get things done, but it doesn't have to feel like you are literally a rat or, a lab rat or a hamster in a wheel. Like, it's just so strange. I don't understand. I don't quite understand. And I wish we would do more to shift the narrative, because I think it does so much more harm. To keep purporting that the definition of success is hustle and burnout and humble bragging about being busy, versus saying, hey, I'm going to take time to rest, or I can't actually do this because I need to spend some time with me. Like, that is okay. And, I feel like, we need to do a lot more around that. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like you can get to a place where regulation actually feels boring? Where you're just like, I wonder about that.
It's I've never been asked that. I have not experienced it because in my mind, regulation allows us to be like, wow, everything's so cool. Like, oh my God, this feels so good. Or, oh my God, look at the way that leaf looks out there. I'm going to stare at that for an hour, and like the sun and whatever. And that sounds so kind of, I don't know, existential, or almost like we'd have to be like monks and like constantly like connected into the world or whatever. But we really don't. It's that, okay, when I'm working and I'm in work mode, I know that I'm not focusing as much on the beauty of the world around me. I'm kind of like in something. But I know that to come back to a state where I feel more in myself, all I need to do is remember how easily I can create incredible sensations in my body that are so engaging to the mind. And what's cool is that you're never going to have the same practice ever again, right? Like, you might do the same movements and different things are going to come up, or you're going to notice different points of pressure, or you're going to do them slightly differently, or maybe you go a little further this time, maybe you decide to come in a little bit more. Like, we cannot run out of ways to do this work. And so, and when we are doing this work in support of what the body asks for that day, because we build that somatic awareness, we build that ability to hear our bodies, then it's always going to look different, right? Because we never have the same day in our lives. I think before we build rewards in our subconscious around this work, it can be boring, it can be scary, it can feel like a task, it can feel like I'm back doing, school homework, right? And so a bit of the pressure comes off when I can just say that that's going to be the case for clients until they get there. Because I'm not, even though I'm super gung-ho on nervous system regulation, I don't want them to feel like this overly positive, like, it's like so great, when they're just not there yet. And that's also valid, because I wasn't there in the beginning. Right? I was like, I just literally want to lie in bed. I'm not into this, right? So I believe in the end, when we really do expand that window of tolerance, it also allows us to expand our capacity for joy. Right? Not just our capacity for stress. And so it's really difficult for life in general, but also regulation work to get boring. However, until that point, I think it can totally get boring, annoying. I don't want to do it. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. I could see that. Like, okay, when am I going to be, like when, especially if you're used to outcomes based rewards, you're like, okay, when do I get to the outcome? When do I get to the shiny reward?
Right,
You
right.
know, let me ask this. I'm just curious, like, your personal perspective. What is one thing that has really worked for you in regulating your nervous system? And, what's something that hasn't worked at all?
Good question. So for me, in regulating my nervous system, it's somatics, but I call them like intuitive flow
Okay,
somatics, right?
interesting.
So this is where I position myself either standing or sitting or lying, whatever is calling to me. And I start off with kind of like a sequence and somatic movements that are familiar to me. So I'm not doing anything intricate. Maybe I'm just swaying the knees side to side
Okay.
on, my back, or maybe I am, doing some hip circles or whatever. And I use staying in these movements for a long time and taking it really slow to listen to my body and, okay, what do you want to do now? And that, depending on the day, might look
Wow.
like getting up and, taking up space and like feeling like I'm bringing energy back in. And then another day, it might look like I want to curl up into a ball and feel safe and protected and just rock side to side. And so for me, that is the pinnacle, because then we're not basing our healing off of what somebody else is telling us to do. We
Right.
truly become the expert in our bodies. And I believe we are always the experts on us. I believe I am not the expert in comparison to my clients. They will always know better. I have more information and skills that I've known for longer, but that's really it. These are smart women, and I'm not in their bodies. But when we can truly move based on what our body is asking for versus what somebody is telling us to do, then that, even just as an emotional shift, is
Right.
so powerful. We're talking about building that deep self-trust and that autonomy. So for me, it was started with the movement, and as many emotional shifts do, I start these concepts through movement, and then they actually have shifts in the way that you move around in the world or the way you relate to yourself. It's pretty powerful. It really makes that mind-body connection idea come to life. And then I start seeing, oh, I took that little step of listening to myself instead of listening to somebody else. And that eventually transfers into setting boundaries in my life, even if it doesn't make somebody happy. Or, taking the time that I need, even if my boss is like, well, we have this deadline. Who cares? It's my life. I need to do what I got to do.
Yes.
Right? And so that's been really powerful. What was your second question again?
What hasn't worked? You're like, you
Hasn't
know
worked.
what? This is not it. This is
Yes,
not it.
absolutely. Meditation. I don't do any
Yeah.
meditation. The idea of forcing my body to sit still at any point, I don't want it, right? My body has been through
Interesting.
so much. It has carried me through so much. It loves me so much. And the way that I honor it back is if I want to take a movement or even just like scratch my head or take a stretch, it is not a definition of how capable I am of practicing healing because I can sit still for however long and try and clear my mind. Right? In fact, I want my
So
subconscious
interesting.
mind speaking to me. I want to see the images it brings up. I want to connect into whatever narrative is being brought up at a deeper level for me today so that I can work with that, celebrate that, take movement to support that, create more safety, hear what I might need to shift in my life, right? And so I always say all of these practices, cold plunge, meditation, hot yoga, the ones that can cause further activation and dysregulation, high intensity exercise,
Right.
restrictive eating, right? Because it's so stressful to like restrict your diet. You can do when you're regulated, right? That's the whole point. We're
Right.
trying to get to a
Right.
space where healing isn't forever and we can start growing and we actually feel good in our bodies enough to go do the cold plunge and get the benefits from that. But when we are dysregulated, we don't want to push the body further to the brink in any
Yes.
capacity. We want to cocoon, we want to nurture, we want to go low intensity, we want to do much less than we think we should be doing. And that is where that conflict sits in. But what I really find courageous of the women that I work with is that conflict comes in. They're like, I am not doing enough. I am going too slow. And instead of panicking and starting to do more, they vulnerably share that with me. And I reinforce that that is okay to feel that way and keep going slow.
I love that. I
And
love
that's a
that.
huge part of it. right? I couldn't do my job without these incredible women that I work with who share with me where they're at and trust me to not judge them for it, or trust me to not, go into fix it mode because they're not feeling good, and actually practice what I preach, which is it's valid that you're feeling that way.
Absolutely. I love that. Again, clapping that you said that about meditation, about all of these different modalities, and, saying, hey, some of this doesn't work for me, because I feel like, especially now in the wellness community, there's this paradigm of more is better. So you need to do a cold plunge and red light therapy and meditate and this and go to your sound bath and go to breath work at, whatever place. And you're like, this is, to me, at least for me, I'm like, this feels like more things. And, it feels stressful to try to keep up with that type of schedule in the name of healing. Whereas, I'll give an example. Someone invited me, I feel really bad about this, I'm calling myself out. Someone invited me to a sound bath the other day, and I was like, I just am not feeling it. Like, I don't feel like doing another thing.
Good for you.
And, like meditation too. Everyone's on the meditation bandwagon. You need to meditate. Meditation is you're probably the first person. I applaud you for being like, hey, this was not it for me. And I think that it's amazing for us to recognize that not every modality is right. It's figuring out what works for you. It's saying no to healing as consumption and capitalism, I think, and really tapping into the wisdom of your body and saying sometimes doing nothing is the biggest gift I could give my body at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And, I see on Instagram, and I'm with other nervous system coaches or somatic coaches, this very one size fits all approach of like, this is how we do it. It's this number of sessions, and like, you will be, this is just what you're getting. And like, in a way, I really, applaud their boundaries and like the way they set up, because I can definitely fall into overworking for my clients. Because if I've done 12 sessions with somebody and they need 14, I'm not charging them for that. I'm giving them that because we're almost there and we're going to get there, and I'm not letting them go. And I think a lot of, coaches would listen to that and be like, oof, like that's going to lead to burnout. To me, it leads to a lot of fulfillment, and I set my boundaries. But I agree with you that not everything's going to stick. And that's why we got to try a lot, because we're not going to know what could have if we don't try it. And we're also not going to know what doesn't unless we try it. And also when something doesn't work, we need to start saying, it's not for me. I don't care how much it's touted as like this big, incredible health trend, right? It's just not for me. And usually if something isn't for us, there's a good reason. I don't think somebody just decides it's not for me and there's no reason for that. Usually it's a resistance, again, because it's scary to go there. There's a resistance because you've maybe worked with a practitioner in the past and they re-traumatized you in some way or brought you into some type of subconscious thing, and it really like messed your mind up. That's what happened to me, right? So I was very anti-practitioner for a while, which was a hard space to be in until I healed from that. And so I don't think anybody, very few people at least, would just cast something off for no reason. If we really see everything as protective, then we know that, again, there's a reason that thing isn't working for you. And let's just trust that, okay, maybe in the future, but for right now, let's try a different approach.
Agree. I love that. I love that. And this conversation I feel like needs to be had more. Yes. Trusting your body, not wholesale signing up for every single thing, because it's not effective at all. And it leads to, I think, more dysregulation, because you're then on another treadmill of trying to do the next thing. Mm-hmm. I want to transition into our true or false segment.
Great. Yeah.
So we have a ton of true or false questions. I'm going to go through these, and we'd love for you to answer true or false.
Okay.
So the first one is, perfectionism is often a trauma response in disguise.
Yes, but it depends, of course, how you define trauma. I would call it a protection response or a survival response in disguise, because again, I do not believe we have to identify with trauma for us to hold beliefs that hinder us, like a perfectionism.
Interesting. The next one, you can shock your nervous system back into regulation.
False. And I am so over 3 to 5 day resets. I mean,
Right.
great if it
Thank
gives you some
you.
support, but man, it's just going to wear off, and you're going to feel like you're trapped in that cycle.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Thank you for clearing the air on that one. Daily routines can rewire the nervous system.
Absolutely, yes, but it depends what you're doing in your daily routine. And I think eventually all of us want to no longer be reliant on a daily routine, right? And we
Agreed.
kind of spoke about this a little bit, but your daily routine is inevitably going to get messed up at some point. Something's going to happen, something's going to go on, right? And so there is a need to support whatever makes us feel good on a day to day with also taking that preventative work so that if it falls to the wayside, we don't feel like we're right back where we started.
Agree. You can't heal trauma without therapy.
That's false. But it also depends on the type of therapy.
I'm curious, is there a type of therapy that you prefer, or maybe not prefers, right, or that you've resonated with maybe personally and maybe your clients find success with?
A lot of my clients move to regulation work off of therapy or complement regulation work with therapy. And it's typically when they've gotten to a place where they've done so much trauma or talk therapy that they are so sick and tired of their own story, so activated by it, feel like they're living in it, they're thinking about it, that it's actually starting to make them worse. So they leave sessions feeling worse and unsupported between sessions. Where I find clients having a lot of success combining my program with a therapist is a therapist who is future thinking. So helping them to build strategy and plan and kind of like set themselves up well in the future, and not always being like, what happened in your past that made it this way, but instead, what actions can we take?
Right.
And or a therapist who allows them a space to be validated and supported as they share and kind of offload what they've been holding from the energy of others or from the people they take care of in their lives or from their work. I believe that a lot of trauma therapists and therapists who focus on the psychodynamic, analyzing the past, do not incorporate enough regulation work, focus on joy, safety, because many of them are, coming out of, textbooks and degrees, and this is how we do it, and specific modalities. And so it can be easy to also, as a therapist, get lost in thinking the work is getting done because your client is making a lot of connections. Again, intellectualizing, moments. I am this way because of that. But is the client actually feeling better, or do they just now have enough to write a thesis on their past and on their mind and how it relates to their present?
This is another thank you one. I'm telling you, this is one that I know I'm throwing us down a rabbit hole off of our true or false, but I just, just to put this out there, I agree. I feel like a lot of times I hear people who have been in therapy for 10 years.
Right.
And they can talk to the detail who hurt them when, how, what, and how it's manifested in their life. But how they're going to come out of that, the conversation has never circled to that. Mm-hmm. And, unfortunately, my experience has been those people seem like they are, it's almost like,
back
in the day, I'm going to show my age, with a Walkman or like a CD player when it would start to skip.
Yeah.
It's almost like that paradigm where they're like, kind of just skipping. It's the same thing. And I love what you said about, it's like, how do you get to a place where you're future planning and talking about joy and figuring out ways to live the life that you have right now in this present moment in a positive way, where the story isn't running your life over and over and over again. I think it's so important.
Absolutely, that we can register we're truly in the present and we're not actually living in the past anymore.
Exactly.
In our bodies and in our subconscious.
Absolutely. Love it. Breath work can instantly regulate the nervous system.
I think it depends. I see a lot of breath work done that is trying to get people like high on their own supply, and that is super dysregulating. It makes people cry a lot. I've done it before, and I've come out of it in my healing thinking like, wow, that was like so transformational. But actually really all it did was open up a bunch of stuff and make me like wail and like go into a kind of survival state. So if you're well versed and you feel that it's supportive to you, again, everyone's the expert on them. I'm not one to say. I just find that right now it's getting hyped as a trend where everyone's trying to kind of like get out of their minds a little bit. And that is really scary if you're already in survival mode, right? You're kind of further dissociating yourself or numbing yourself to things, right? Or you're forcing a release before it's ready to come out on its own. Now, I have a really good girlfriend who's a breathwork practitioner, and she is one of the ones who says you're actually not supposed to do it that way, right? We're actually supposed to be doing it in a way where we are just creating more oxygen, ability to feel the body, really just opening up more space and feeling like, oh, I can breathe again. Right. And I have seen her practice, and I, have even attended some of her events, and she crushes it. You feel really good. You're like, oh, yes, bringing in the oxygen, and I don't feel like I'm going to pass out, and I don't feel like I have like T-Rex arms, right?
Right.
So I think it depends.
Interesting. You can't meditate your way out of chronic stress.
True.
Okay. Slow, boring routines can sometimes be the most healing.
True.
I agree.
Although I think over time they eventually get less boring once you start to get the rewards, right?
Yeah, I agree. That's something in this season of my life I'm trying to like sink into, is, not feeling like that I've got to like go for the dopamine hit all the time, and just being, literally.
Absolutely.
Overachievers are often living in fight or flight without realizing it.
True, and or freeze, right?
Yeah.
More shut down. I think a lot of overachievers, really go gung-ho into fight flight, and then pretty quickly start to have to numb out to handle the level that they've taken onto their plate, right?
Right. Very interesting. The goal is not calm, it's flexibility and resilience.
Absolutely true.
And stress is just mental, it doesn't live in the body.
False. Completely false.
Interesting. Yeah, true. Yeah, it's false. It's true that it's false, is what I meant. Apologies. Okay, now we're going to transition to another segment we call Rapid Fire. I'm just going to pull a few of these questions, and it's just a way for us to get the wealth of your knowledge, because I feel like I could talk to you all day, in some smaller bites. So I would love to know from you, what is a daily ritual that you never skip?
Daily dance routine.
I love that. Do you have like a certain type of music that you dance, or just whatever you're vibing to?
That's like whatever I'm listening to, but I need to be dancing while I'm making breakfast, dancing while I'm getting ready for the day, and that is how I incorporate it in, and it just brings me joy and connection, and like music is so healing, right? So it's my own little movement, my joy ritual, I would call it.
I love that. I love a good dance party, a self-dance party. I think my neighbors think I'm like crazy because they probably see me like, woo, and they're like, this chick, she's so weird. The last wellness trend that made you roll your eyes.
Cortisol juice.
Wait, what is that? I've never even heard of that.
It's this big trend that's going on. It's like happy juice, cortisol juice. It's supposed to like regulate your nervous system and your cortisol, and it's just, a bunch of sugar and additives. And we know that supplements they are supplemental. They can be supportive, but we are not going to out-supplement chronic stress, high or low cortisol that's in a chronic condition. We need true self-soothing and self-healing through regulation work. Wow. A juice isn't going to fix us, right? We're not broken, but a juice isn't going to do it if you've been living in years of dysregulation. Oh my,
I have not heard of that. I'm going to have to go look that up after. Yeah. I'm a marketer by trade, that's the business I run. So I instantly, I smell marketer behind this, but I don't want to judge. I'll have to do the research myself.
Please do. Let me know what you think.
I'm going to do that's very interesting. What's a trend that you secretly love?
So not a secret, right? I really do love that somatics are trending right now. Yeah. And you see a lot of somatic movements on Instagram. My fear is that now individuals are doing them. One, there's a lot of individuals coaching them who aren't actually properly trained. And two, there's a lot of kind of like, do this quick somatic practice that is not individualized, right? It's just on somebody's Instagram page to get more likes or get more engagement. And women or individuals can do that practice and not know what they're looking for, maybe open too much stuff up. I see a lot of like self-paced courses around somatics, and I think these can be very beginner friendly to learn some stuff. but we are not trying to force a release. We're not trying to force ourselves to open up. We're trying to listen to the body and work with it and show it again that it can trust us to keep it safe.
Very, very interesting. Hot shower or ice bath?
Hot shower.
Yeah,
But I can't go too much in either direction. Like, I don't want too hot or too cold.
Me either. It's so funny. My boyfriend, he's originally from Belarus. He's like such an ice bath. We go to the banya and he's like so into ice baths or going into the cold plunge. And I'm just like, I'm not feeling it. There's like, I don't know. I think it's like my part Nigerian blood that leads to be like warm. I don't know. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
I'm just curious because you love dancing, kind of a wild card question.
Sure.
What song instantly makes you feel safe?
Oh, it's this song called Cold Little Heart by Michael Kiwanu, or I'm saying that right. I'm butchering the last name. It's beautiful. It's like connecting. It's like long. It's gorgeous. And that one is one I always put on, especially for like a good drive where I'm just like, ooh, I just want to like look at the scenery and feel good. I'll send it to you after this.
Yes, please do. We'll have to link up to that too for everyone to take a listen. I want to ask one last question before we move on. The book that changed how you see healing.
Oh, there's so many. I have to go with, it's such a, conventional answer. The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah, for sure.
Changed the way that I see healing. I will say a second book that I now give to a lot of my clients is called Psycho-Cybernetics, and it's about it's about a guy, well, it's written by a guy who was actually a plastic surgeon, and he was interested into why sometimes he does a surgery and people totally change their identity of self, and they're like, I feel great now, like now I'm confident and whatever. And some people he does the surgery for, and they still hold on to those beliefs that they're not enough, or they don't even notice it, or they still feel ugly, or they need to do more. And why and how our subconscious mind plays such a role in the way we move through the world and the way that we self-identify, and how it kind of runs as this little machine. So it's very relevant to the work that I'm doing.
I love that. And sorry, I totally lied. I have one more question I want to ask you. What is the small luxury that you refuse to give up? Just curious.
Ooh, I have these Nod pods that are like weighted eye mask pods, and I love them. They are so good for sleep. I love, anything weighted. I don't have a big weighted blanket because I like my feet to be out. My Nod pods to sleep, I need those no matter what.
So interesting. We'll have to link up to those too. I've never heard of those.
Everyone, like so many people in my life onto them, and they fall off in the middle of the night. You don't have to tie them. But it just helps you to feel like a soothing kind of support as you're falling asleep.
Very cool. Very cool. Now we're going to move on to our next section, which is called Breaking Down Wild Trends. So we all know on the Instagrams, on the TikToks, everything, there are these crazy trends. You see people doing things from one day to the next. And because we have you, Kate, as an expert, we'd love for you to break down a few of these wild trends. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the first one. Everyone is tapping. EFT is trending. I see people doing it all the time, talking about how EFT, has really been transformational in their life. Yeah. Is it really helping the nervous system, or is it just a placebo effect?
It's so hard for us to know, right? I always say, research in these areas is a little behind, right? Because we're very Western medicine focused. I do not do EFT tapping with my clients. I have a lot of clients who do it and find it supportive. And I think the reason is two-pronged. One, a little placebo effect, but two, if you are adding pressure into the body, you are connecting more into your body and becoming aware of what is there. Also, when we're talking about rumination, so we're talking about an emotion that just keeps circling and spiraling, we need to break the loop of that rumination. And one of the ways that we do that is through movement or touch, because it distracts the mind enough that it breaks the kind of spiral, right? And so that if you're doing a full kind of tapping routine, right, you are focused again on those pressure points, and you almost lose or get a little distracted from, but not in a way where you're repressing it, just kind of like breaking it from whatever sensation is causing you discomfort. So I can definitely see why there would be a benefit based on the science in general around regulation work.
Interesting. Fascinating. Let me ask this one, because this is something that I really feel torn about. mushroom coffees and stress gummies. So I'm going to admit I do drink mushroom coffee.
Oh, I love it.
But I'm like, am I drinking this because I think it really works, or you know what? I just don't know. So let me ask you this: are we just trying to hack what needs deep work, or are these things like mushroom coffee and stress gummies or whatever else it may be, are they actually really helpful for our nervous system?
Oh, I love mushrooms. I think they have so many
Me
health benefits,
too.
right? And
Yeah.
I even have in my own journey done some like microdosing for
Right.
building more kind of like cognitive ability. I have had a lot of clients do that and support depression or anxiety through that. And then also
Right.
clients who have taken things like lion's mane, where there's no psychedelic effect, and really just seen an improvement in their health, right? So I think mushrooms are great. What I want to say about any of this stuff, stress gummies, mushroom coffees, is if you get a placebo and you feel good, just stick with it.
Right.
Just do it, right?
Right.
Because what who cares at that point? If you feel like it's working and it's not causing any harm, which these things aren't, great. The only time I kind of warn against these things is when they become something you are reliant on to feel better, whether that's a placebo, which often it is. I think especially with like things like stress gummies and things like
Yeah.
that. In the same way that I might become dependent on a sleep medication, but if I leave it at home, then I can't sleep, right? Or if I'm
Exactly.
stressed and my gummies are in my car and I can't get to them, now I feel like I can't de-stress myself, right? So two-pronged approach. They can be supportive physical cues and signaling to our body, I've taken something to support you. You can start to calm down now. But most of it is coming from our mind's decision of, oh, you've taken something, I'm allowed to calm down now through that
Yeah.
association.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I feel like understanding that difference is key, and
Yeah,
also being okay with it. Like saying like, hey, I love my mushroom coffee in the morning and
great.
makes me feel great. So is it actually doing anything? Don't know, but c'est la vie.
Totally.
Another one I keep seeing, really interesting. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding method, has gone viral. I feel like it's gone viral again and again and again. Can it really help with chronic dysregulation?
To me, it's stress management. I think,
Okay.
again, like we were talking about in the beginning, if we are only doing things on a prescriptive basis, meaning I'm feeling stressed, therefore I'm doing this kind of way of looking around and for things I can see and whatever I can touch. But in the beginning, we do need stress management to get to a
Right.
regulated enough state that we can even go into the deeper work. So all of these mindfulness-based practices, quick tips and tricks, they have their place. It's just that we are using them as band-aids if we're not actually healing how often that panic or that stress comes up in the first place,
Right.
right? And that can make us feel like we're in some way broken or we're always going to be struggling with this. And so, you know, there's so many great grounding techniques. I mean, that's one of them. But I just found for myself with that one specifically, I felt a bit belittled when somebody was like, just do this. And I was like, I am literally panicking.
Yeah.
Like, you can't almost always position yourself. So if there's any blame or judgment that we can't do something, that's when I say, let's drop that. Because a lot of these quick practices aren't going to help somebody who's in a pure survival state. Like at that point, our survival mind is taken over. It does not care what you can see and what you can touch and all of that. It is just fully in that zone.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So interesting. Yeah, I feel like like Instagram, TikTok is filled with just do this, just do that, just do, and you're like, all right, what's
Yeah.
actually effective versus what is just, hullabaloo. Anyway, uh,
Yeah.
curious this next one. I keep seeing sleep tourism and burnout retreats popping up all over the place. Are they band-aids or can they actually help before someone shells out a bunch of money to do one of these?
Yeah, I mean, it's so going to depend on this one. I will tell
Yeah.
you, I take what I call re-regulation trips. So, like,
Okay.
after
Interesting.
any type of like big stress, I go on a trip and it's for me and it's on my own and it's to re-regulate and just like totally self-soothe. And there is something really powerful. Again, we're talking about kind of the physical cue of gummies. Imagine the physical cue of literally changing your environment and kind of turning your phone off and like getting into a space of connection, whether that's with yourself or with other people as well. The only thing I am wary of with retreats is if somebody is leading them who is, again, trying to show you that it worked. So they try to open a bunch of stuff up to prove to you that, like, look, I got you to cry, and look, I got you to feel all these feelings, when that it was just way too much for your system and it was way too intense of an environment. And I've had clients have this experience before, and we've actually had to, it kind of like set them back in a way, and then we had to go and rebuild from a space that was further burnout because they got so activated, opened up so much stuff that then they shut down even harder. So I would just be really cognizant of what's the itinerary. Like, don't be afraid to ask questions, a ton of them, and just be really certain what you're going into. And if, you know, something is feeling like it's too much for you, don't do it. Yeah. Right? Doesn't matter how much money you shelled out when it comes to your health, you have to prioritize and respect your body.
Agree. Prioritize, respect your body. And don't get caught up in the, I have to do this for this outcome, because, you know, yeah, sometimes it's not, you know, even if it's someone that is an expert, I think sometimes we put too much, you know, credence into experts without trusting what you know, what really feels right in our soul and in our body. Absolutely. Which is the most important. Now we're going to transition to another section. This is my all-time favorite. It is the Reddit rabbit hole. Let's jump into the rabbit hole. So what we do here is we scour Reddit for questions related to people asking about the nervous system regulation, so on and so forth. And we've got some really amazing ones that I'd love for you to answer.
Sure.
So this first one, and you'll probably see me like squinting in the screen because I want to read these out. This one, someone asked, they are seeking simple daily habits to help heal my nervous system. And the background that they provided is, do you have any daily simple things that you could do to help heal your nervous system? Stuff that doesn't require a lot of time or energy, preferably, because let's be honest, it takes all that I have to both work and brush my teeth on most days, which is really unfortunate to hear. What would you say to this person?
Oh, yeah. So one of my favorite joy practices to regulate my nervous system is in the morning and in the evening when I'm in bed, and I just like audibly moan, and I'm like, oh, it feels so good to be in bed, and I like sound like a crazy person. I like shake my legs around, and I like shift my weight a little bit, and all of that, to just really experience luxury, like luxury in my bed. My blankets are there, like my PJs are on, like nobody needs me, like I'm just gonna roll around here, right? And that is the perfect lazy girls regulation, right? Yes. If you are feeling just totally shut down. But kind of also what we spoke about before, right? Introducing gentle swaying, introducing, you know, gentle vagal toning practices as you're on calls, as you are making lunch, you know, dancing. But for somebody like that, if their energy is that low, they're not going to be doing a dance party, right? So it's all about gentle supportive movement. Remind yourself you're in your body, you know, give some nice massage to the body or sensory experience. Just run your hands, your fingertips over parts of your body very lightly, and you'll feel the tingling, right? A nice head scratch. And that's really where we have to start, is creating really joyful sensations in the body that start to give it energy again. It starts to go, oh, like I can feel this again. I have a reason to come back alive.
Love that. I think the movement. So you typically, you sway and you do, you know, touching your ears, and for me, my neck is always where I hold a lot of tension. So massaging my neck is really powerful. Are there any other movements? I saw you do like this, which is beautiful, like kind of hugging yourself.
Yeah.
Any other things you do that really feel rich, and I love that, luxurious as well?
Well, because I am super well versed in somatics, I can really just kind of pull out whatever I need that day. But there's a lot of lying on the floor or lying in bed and shifting the hips or bending the knees and shifting the knees and swaying them, or pushing, you know, the balls of my feet out or shifting the ankles, right? There's a lot of expansion through lengthening the body. So pointing the toes and putting the hands up or like out to a T. You even feel more powerful when you do this, you know? Ways of, again, kind of bringing in energy. I also will do some light patting or tapping as if I'm building up the energy in my system all the way from my feet and have it here, and then either harness it in or send it out like we were talking about, you know, almost like completing, like you're acting, right? So there definitely are a lot of approaches. It's just that early days when we almost feel like we can hardly think about anything at all, let alone plan a sequence for ourselves, right? It will look like a lot of rolling, fetal position rocking, swaying side to side, right? Just to get our system feeling a little bit more calm and in itself.
Got it. Got it. Absolutely. This next one, it's a longer one, but one that I absolutely cannot wait to ask you. So I'm going to read the whole thing. So this person starts off with, how do you let your anger out without letting it take over? And we kind of talked about this earlier, but they have some really interesting nuances here. I have a hard time with anger, not because I lash out, but because I don't. I shove it down, bury it deep because it scares me. But I think so many people can relate to this.
Absolutely.
It feels like there's a beast in a cage at the pit of my stomach, and lately it's been testing the bars. I worry that if it ever escapes, I won't be prepared. For the first time in my life, I'm furious that my mom didn't believe me and let me down so many times. I'm enraged that my brother betrayed me. I'm disgusted that my father treated me with such disregard, seriously harmed me, and thought what he did was okay, or worse, never thought about it at all. I don't know how to let any of this anger out. I want to smash something, slam a door, express myself violently, just like I saw my father do. But unlike him, I don't want to revel in it. I fear my anger. The moment it starts to surface, I shove it back down, afraid of what might happen if I let it breathe. I know I need to release it somehow, but nothing feels right. The idea of screaming into a pillow seems so absurd to me that I won't even try. It seems juvenile, undignified, as if wanting to break things isn't. He says, haha. But what is there? How do you let anger out in a way that feels safe, productive, and real? If you've struggled with this, what has helped you? By the way, before we go into this, I just want to, I know we're reading people who post things publicly on Reddit. Just honor this person. Wow, for being so vulnerable and sharing that experience of anger and, what is behind it. Because I think a lot of times, as they're saying, like, we don't talk about this in society.
Totally.
Especially when it comes to the emotion of anger. It's like almost taboo to talk about what's making you angry.
Oh, absolutely. And especially for women, right? We're supposed to be good girls.
Exactly.
So, this speaks to primarily the importance of titration, building up our capacity to even get certain releases or feel certain emotions. Because a lot of the women that I work with carry shame around the idea of being angry, especially if they have lashed out in certain capacities in the past. They even sometimes feel, and I was this way, so no judgment, but I used to feel so afraid of even just singing in the shower, even if no one was around, because it felt like strange to me to kind of like allow myself to express freely without always being so poised and perfect. Right. And I remember I worked with a practitioner when I was healing, and I told her my goal is to be able to scream because I could not get my anger out. And I felt so weird screaming, right? I felt like, like I can hear myself and like, this is weird. And there's something about it that carries a lot of shame for many of us and makes us feel like we're being too loud. We're taking up too much space. And so we do anger somatics. And anger somatics always need to look like, resourcing or regulation on the front end and on the back end. So if you're going to get angry, if you're going to do some punches, you're going to push a wall, you're going to wring out your hands, you're going to push something away, right? Which can often feel actually easier than screaming into a pillow or even screaming at all, because there's something about vocalization that feels very vulnerable when we've often been told our voice is not worthy or shouldn't be heard. That on the front and back end of that, we're also self-soothing again through some type of swaying or slow movement or supportive movement to remind ourselves we can release that anger, but we can also come back to a state of safety. That being said, for this individual, right, I think it would be really important for them to work with somebody who's going to individualize their approach, because even letting that level of anger out, like punching once or twice, right, and feeling, you're starting to get that, can feel like, oh no, now it's building up and now it's all coming out. And when we fear anger, and in a sense, fear our own expression, right, there needs to be a lot of work on the front end to build up that self-worth and self-confidence first before allowing that anger out. Otherwise, we will just feel very ashamed of it and uncomfortable with it, and will again create a kind of fear association with it and not want to really revisit it again.
Wow. Wow, really powerful. And to this person, you know, yeah, I think it's so brave. I always commend people, especially on Reddit, who are looking for solutions, and commend them for being honest and vulnerable and putting themselves out there. One last one in the Reddit rabbit hole. So this person starts off with healing tears plus nervous system regulation. I've noticed that my tears are different since working on trauma healing, plus learning about polyvagal theory. I never used to cry much. Always took a lot to push me over the edge. I never cried with hormones or monthly cycle, etc. But since committing to trauma therapy, I've noticed a new type of tears, like I'm riding a wave of pure emotion, rather than feeling actually upset or inconsolable. I don't know if this makes sense. It's huge, wet, bobbly tears, which stream down my face, like something physically releasing from my body. They don't tend to last long. I like them. It makes me feel more alive. There's both a lot of pain and a lot of self-love behind them. Does anyone else recognize this? I think I read somewhere that this is the nervous system resetting into a parasympathetic state. I know that I have a flight freeze default pattern, so there's usually a lot of movement and busyness in my life. These tears seem to be happening when I've consciously put time into healing, with therapy and yoga, deep massages, music, and when I've taken out excess stimulation from my environment. It may be that I'm coming out of a low level of chronic dissociation. I just wondered if anyone had a SE, I'm not too sure what that is, nervous
Somatic
system.
experience.
Oh, somatic experience. Okay, thank you. Nervous system biology perspective on what's happening. And we have you, Kate, who's perfect to answer this.
Oh,
What do
I
you
love,
think?
I mean, this person seems like they already really understand a lot, right? So we
Right.
again see on Instagram that release is like an exorcism, like just everything is coming out. And notice this person said they're short bursts. I actually enjoy them. It feels
Right.
different. It feels kind of like something's coming out of me, but in a really supportive way, like I'm cleansing, right? These are the releases that we want. This is when somebody has titrated to thawing out of their freeze and not just gone full flight, and actually allow themselves to slowly ease through the emotions that they shut down to. So this is gorgeous. You are going to cry more when you go through regulation. I don't think I cried for 5 to 7 years before I went through my journey of regulation work,
Wow.
right? Because I was just so numb. I couldn't do it. I would sometimes feel it building up and then it would I just push that down, right?
Right.
So to me, crying absolutely became one of my favorite activities. It still is today. I love when I cry. And so it's just incredible to see this person build that association with crying, because now they're not going to be so afraid of it or see it as weak or see it as something to panic over, but instead they're getting the experience of crying as being restorative, as being a form of self-soothing. And when we practice somatics, not to force a release, not to open up fascia, not to, rip everything open, what we find is that release often comes when we feel so safe that we can finally let out what we've been protecting, putting armor around. And it doesn't look like a big exorcism. It looks like, I finally get to let this thing out that really hurt me or that was really intense. So this is a really cool post and absolutely spot on, right? They obviously know a lot.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it's so sad in society we've shamed crying. Like in corporate, it's like, oh, you're going to ruin your career if you cry, or big girls don't cry, or men don't cry. There's so much negative narrative around crying, which I think is incredibly harmful, actually, to people.
Absolutely. God, crying is like one of the best things that we can
It's
do,
such a
right?
release. So that was our Reddit rabbit hole. Kate, you're just such a wealth of knowledge. I'd love to know what you're working on now and where we can find you online.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on Instagram at Aligned with Kate, and my website is alignedwithkate.com. So easy to remember, same handle, right? What we're working on now, we have a couple projects. So I am just signed a book deal, and so I'm starting to write with a few other with a few other female founders on leadership for me, specifically in the health industry, and how that looks from making sure women's voices are heard in health spaces and that they really are taught. They're the experts on themselves. We are also gearing up to eventually launch a program for therapists and practitioners to learn how to integrate this work into their own practices so that they can bring this to their clients and help create greater safety for their clients. And that's what we're building towards primarily right now. Down the line, there's a nonprofit coming, but we're working on it as we go. So a lot of big projects ahead. I'll be at a couple of great speaking events this year, and I'm excited to kind of share more on that so that clients can get different master classes and talks and hopefully have greater access to resources to support themselves.
Incredible, incredible. Final question. If you were to create your own question for yourself and answer it, what would it be?
Oh, this is a tough one. Is it possible to be broken? And my answer to that would be no. There's nothing to fix, that our systems are so much grander and more intricate than we can consciously understand. And it is not possible to be beyond the point of repair. Anyone who tells you that or says they can't help you is just not skilled enough to do so or wants to take an easy path.
Right.
There is not anyone I have worked with, despite how far gone they have felt, that hasn't seen improvement. And as somebody who went to the absolute depths of shutdown and climbed my way out, I know it doesn't make it easy and it can be hard, but none of us are ever broken. We can come back to a state of regulation and homeostasis in our system.
Wow, how powerful. Thank you for that. What a powerful way to end.
Of course.
Kate, you're amazing. I could literally talk to you all day. I mean, it's just,
You too.
gosh, you're such a wealth of knowledge. Thank you times a million for being on the podcast today. I just learned so much from you, and we'll have to do this again if you have time, because
Absolutely. I always have time for you, and thank you for hosting a podcast that allows women to gain access to this type of information, to a variety of different experts. I mean, that is such a noble and important and necessary thing to do today, to kind of cut through the noise, right? Cut through the misinformation and seek out those who are going to give hope and give inspiration and give next steps to women and individuals who need it. So I just am really honored to be on this podcast and to share this conversation with you.
thank you. Such a joy. I'm giving you a virtual hug. Anyway, thank you, Kate. Till next time.
Thank you.
Truly appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you.